go.
That's a problem.
Good.
All right, thank you everybody for attending another Political Science Student Association meeting. Today we got a little creative and we're calling it an International CrossRoads. It's a special CrossRoads today. We do have members from the German Embassy up in DC. If you guys want to introduce yourselves briefly.
Sure. Hi, my name is Kevin Dibb. I'm actually American, but I've been working for the German Embassy now for 5 years, and I help them something out with U.S. domestic politics.
Hi, my name is Markus Seglas, just because of my funny accent. I'm German citizen, working in the German Embassy, working also in the political department, and we mainly cover U.S. domestic politics.
All right, we also have special guests from the Student Government Association today, Sarah Gonzalez and her associates. If you guys want, we have PSSA stickers right here, laptop stickers, and we have pocket constitutions and declarations of independence. We have a lot of them, so feel free to take one and keep it. It's always good to have a constitution on you. And we also have plenty of candy from our Halloween event this last Wednesday. If you want to learn more about that, we'll have a YouTube video uploaded shortly to our channel. But without further ado, I'm going to allow Dr. Cavalli to make a couple announcements. Before I do that, we do have some of our printed copies of our student voter guides. The Student Government Association has sponsored us in helping and assisting with the publication of these voter guides on all 5 campuses this year. So it's a big initiative on part of the PSSA, SGA, Hawk the Vote, and Office of Student Involvement. A lot of hands on deck to make this possible. So if you want to make an informed decision on your ballot this year, please make sure to grab one of these and also come by Young Hall Room 203 tomorrow for 2024 president, or it's a general election forum. It'll be in the Nathan Deal room right there. Dr. Cavalli, Dr. Gersh, Dr. Wilk, and one other professor from the University of North Georgia,
Nathan Price.
Dr. Nathan Price, will be attending, and I'm assuming it'll be a forum typical. They'll be explaining a few things about presidential elections, the history of it in the United States of America, as well as allowing students opportunities to ask questions to really gain a further understanding of what's going on this year. I do ask that if you participate in today's meeting that you speak up a little bit. I'm not trying to yell at you guys, but we don't have a microphone today, and so we won't be able to hear you, or anybody watching virtually will not be able to understand what you're saying, especially because we have classes going on all around us. So when you do speak, I just ask that you speak towards the camera and speak a little bit up. I know it's awkward, but we're working on a budget right now.
Okay, for those of you who might be newcomers or who might not have realized we're doing this, we do it every Wednesday at noon. Everybody's welcome to participate. You don't have to be a member of the Political Science Student Association. I will be passing around an attendance sheet. And again, whether you were here intentionally or not, you can still, we will verify your attendance. And if you add a faculty name next to yours, we will contact that faculty and you can bug them for extra credit. Can't guarantee that you'll get it, but we will let them know that you did attend. We'll pass this around after a few minutes. Okay? So, why don't we, can we put maybe some of those things over there as well? Okay, so that they have access to some of that stuff. What do you think, just to get us started, what would you say is, actually I have sort of a 2-part question to get us started. One would be, what do you think most people would say the state of U.S. politics is right now? And 2, do you agree? Would you say, okay, most people think this, but it's really in truth that? Or would you agree with what you think most people say, or whatever? And again, for those people who have not been here before, this is an open forum, so just jump in and remember, speak loudly. We're competing with the air conditioning. And as Dominic said, we don't have a microphone hooked up. So please do speak up, okay?
I can start off, unless you would like to.
I mean, I can. I think just the state of U.S. politics in general is very divisive on both sides. It's kind of a him versus her type of thing, whether it's you're a one-issue voter or if you're a party line voter. It's very much an environment of hostility around politics, and I think it's a development that's occurred in like the last decade or so, because politics used to be a platform in which you could disagree civilly, but with kind of the theatrics that has come into the realm of American politics, it's created an environment that makes it kind of hard to disagree with people. And it's definitely an environment that I know growing up, like in South Georgia, was very much one-sided, whereas I grew up on another side. And it was not an environment where I felt I was like safe to express my personal opinions. But yeah.
Go ahead. I think you made up a really good point. Right now, it's kind of dangerous to have to be a free thinker and to believe in what you believe and be able to stand on that. Politics has become increasingly polarized in the United States of America, especially over the last 4 to 8 years. But we can look even further than that to start to see a trend developing, at least in Congress. And there's an inability right now for compromise to occur because there is this sort of in-grouping, out-grouping. You're either with us or against us. And there's no longer this idea that I have in my head of like a conservative liberal or a liberal Republican, or a conservative Democrat or a liberal Republican. It's kind of become, the spectrum has extended in a way to where a lot of Americans don't have an understanding of politics to an extent where we have to agree to disagree sometime in order to create change, especially if we want change that's conducive to success for this country. So that, I mean long-term change. So we do see a trend right now where in both administrations, I'll just point to them two most recent ones, Biden and Trump, we have executive order after executive order after executive order, rather than Congress convening together and actually being able to pass legislation bipartisanly. And what that's caused is just a shift in power from one party to another party. So instead of being able to create legislation that would be established in our Constitution and it would last for a period of time, it's sort of become, once I get into office, I'm going to stop what they did and do what we want to do. And so it's become a lot more socialized rather than inherently, I guess, political in nature. And politics itself is a social game, just like economics is a social game at the end of the day. But it's really become kind of nasty in the United States of America. Friendships are being lost, families are being torn apart. I get it. From when I was a little kid, my mom always said, don't talk about politics at the dinner table. But now more than ever, I don't even want anybody to bring up the election at Thanksgiving dinner. I don't want to hear about it anymore. And we live in what Dr. Cavalli has told us in our class before. Essentially, I'm going to be a little liberal with my words, but it's a swing state hell, because right now Georgia is a very important state for the presidential election, and we're being bombarded with rallies, events, canvassing, grassroots organizations, and the most annoying, in my opinion, is political advertisements. So Kamala Harris has fundraised over $1 billion. She's broken records with her campaign. And Donald Trump himself is also, his campaign and his administration, I guess, I can't really call it that yet. They're just bombarding the airwaves, and it's this form of micro-targeting where I'm not going to see the same advertisements as my friends are going to see, and so we're not getting the same type of information being relayed to us. And so when we come together and to debate these topics, it's almost as if there's not a cognizant effort to try to see both sides, rather just see your side from your perspective alone. And I think that it's become very biased and opinionated when there's no room for opinion, when there's like a country where they have to represent the people. So that's one point that you brought up that I just can't help but to see.
Yeah, I agree with you with how partisan politics have been in this election, and last I believe 2 elections. But also, this is probably one of the most important elections we're going to have, maybe in the past decade. This is not a simple Democratic or Republican sort of party hashing it out. It's the party of the Democratic Party and Trump's party. I'm sorry, but Trump is the biggest focal point of this election. And I am going to show my hand here. He is not good for this country. He has the opportunity to really do some awful things, both within foreign relations with the tariffs on Europe and China, 20%, which is really bad. But also, I do kind of want to disagree with partisanship. We have seen some Republicans work with Democrats. It's just the Republican Party is split into two of Trumpers and not Trumpers. So, I mean, we've seen Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney, and others join Democrats and work with them, even in Congress. So, I think it's not exactly a party sort of clash. It's the cult of personality of Trump and the Democratic Party, and some bits of non-Trump Republican Party. So, yeah.
So she had her hand up first.
Just so like that's where I think every branch is important for like how the world views us and how we're viewing ourselves right now. Our legislature is like ranking among the lowest in the world as far as our approval rating. I think our executive is a bit of a joke to the rest of the world, and I don't blame them whatsoever. And I think our judiciary, it's not necessarily weak, I just think it's been very controversial lately between decisions and new additions, which is to be expected when we are as politically polarized as, you know, y'all have kind of gone under. But I don't know if it helps with the political polarization to say, which I'm kind of at the point where we're very close. I'm just ready to let it all play out and be done. But yeah, I am glad that we here have a platform to talk about it.
You're not the only one. I've heard a lot of people express a very similar sentiment. They just want this all to end. And of course, the thing is, it's never going to end. I mean, I've been going through this for, since your parents were little kids, maybe even before that. And it's not going to end now, but I certainly understand the sentiment. And I think more people have expressed that now than in the past.
I think the wanting it to end is more about like the hostility and the fear of like being like kind of, the only word I could think of is like persecuted for your personal opinion, because whether you lean left or whether you lean right, there's always a group opposite of you who is going to beat you down for your beliefs. And it's just getting back to a climate in which, politics is always going to happen. Politics is everywhere, and you're always involved with it no matter if you want to be or not. And just getting back to like a period of time where, yes, politics is a part of your life, but it's not like beating you down in the face and you're getting like hated on because of your political beliefs.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So, coming back to like just wanting to be done and stuff. I recently, like this summer, I became a citizen of this country, and thank you. And like, I think the first thing that people were asking me about is like, are you excited for this to be your first election to be able to vote in? And I just like can't. I just like sit back and like I start thinking, I'm like, I can't believe like this is the first election I get to vote in. So yeah, I think like that's a very common sentiment. Just students, especially like our generation, just being like, I want this to be over with, because I don't know. I know I've been talking to a lot of people in our majors, and international affairs and political science, but still. So just thinking about it, definitely we have different versions, like different perspectives. One is like domestic and the other one's international. But either way, like I feel we're both like both majors have helped us like understand the process more carefully. And I feel like a lot of my friends who are not in this majors, especially like my STEM major friends, they don't really understand. There's a lot of, and I feel like one of the biggest problems right now is like misinformation, whether it's international or domestic, and just being able to have this kind of platform to be able to like, okay, so let's discuss. I don't think there's a lot of discussion going on. I think it's more like just like two sides like barking at each other, coming at each other, instead of having like actual important discussions that need to be had for people to understand what's going on. And unless people go out of their way to like, okay, let me educate myself on this issue or on this party's platform, on this person's platform, they just like look at the ads and that is not enough to understand, or the social media posts, and that is never enough. And so I feel like this types of discussions are like so important.
Yeah.
Because I'm here now for 3 years. I'm from Germany, as you know. I will be here another year. And the main thing I'm always hearing is, okay, the polarization is getting much more worse than it was before. And I of course get it. We have a presidential system, we have a parliamentarian system. So it's clear that during election time you have one against the others. You have the choice of two parties. So it's rather clear that you have a polarized system. But what people are telling is they don't speak about politics and family anymore. And I always ask myself, okay, what's the where does it come from? Why does it get worse when the system as such, two-party system, electoral college, to candidates, hasn't changed? Do you have an answer for that?
I have a response, not necessarily an answer.
I was hoping.
So, so we do have single member districts here, which inherently is going to be a winner-take-all situation. And so you either win or you lose. And so the two-party system is just inherent to our Constitution and the way that things have worked for the last 270 years, give or take a couple. And it's also a huge point of contention that I've heard around here on campus. A lot of people are in favor for a more parliamentarian system. Even one of our own presidents, the only political scientist, Woodrow Wilson, actually commended the British parliamentary system and wanted to revert to something more similar as that. But we see something very similar happen within our own parties, and I believe this is what is one of the root causes to political polarization currently, is because there are only two parties. We have within them certain factions, similar to how you may have like a multi-party system in Europe where you can have a proportional vote and different leaders can represent multi-member districts. Here in the United States, you have to align with either one or two of the parties, and it's become a personality trait at this point. It's an identity that a lot of people resonate with. It's one of the largest voting queues in America. When you go to the polls, you don't know some of these state legislatures or these commissioners or these judges, these county school board educators, the superintendents. They're just names on a ballot, and the only way to recognize whether or not they may or may not agree with some of the issues that pertain to you is that R or that D next to their name. And so a lot of people identify with their parties, and that inherently seems like an issue to me. I have a background in psychology and sociology, and it's very in-grouping, out-grouping. And I personally think that it's advantageous for us to have the system that we have in place currently. It would be difficult to have to ratify or entirely update our Constitution to account for multi-member districts and to have a more parliamentary system. But our chief executive serves as both the head of state and the government here. And this is a point that you brought up where you called the Republican Party the Donald Trump Party. Like, this is the same idea of factions within parties, if you look at it from a broader perspective, because there's MAGA Republicans and then there's traditional Republicans.
That's what I said.
Yeah, and like on the left we have a very similar issue. We have like a growing faction of progressive Democrats compared to maybe more conservative Democrats. And you don't necessarily hear a lot of conservative Democrats coming out and speaking, especially on these larger platforms, because it risks alienating themselves from their party, and it also risks potentially their chances at running for re-election in 2 or 4 or 6 years. So it's a dangerous game to play because it's a personality game at this point. Social media is another point that was brought up. Right now, for the first time, we can have micro-targeting. We can have certain communities and demographics from people that smoke cigarettes. We've learned recently in class that they can try to determine through major data analytics, and so it's more of a game of big data versus a game of big policy per se. The game has changed, and so now their campaigns are using different strategies to try to get themselves into office, but we don't necessarily see anybody, once they've achieved these roles, try to change anything, and that's because it's an advantageous system for them. Incumbents have a 90% advantage in every election, whether it's due to support or fundraising or ability to make networks and connections. And so I don't necessarily like the rhetoric of saying that'd be similar to saying the Republican Party is Donald Trump's party right now. He's obviously going to be the face of the Republican Party. The entire point of the convention is to try to unify a party front. And the Democratic convention did a very similar thing with Kamala Harris. But the Democratic Party is a party of change, and they have changed because they have won the last election, presidential election, because 2 years prior to that, they had won a few senatorial races. It's a bunch of different names and different faces, but simply for the fact that because Republicans had lost that election and the presidential election, and a lot of them, some can say unjustifiably, resented the fact that they lost, it's created a swelling faction where people are starting to realize that the system that we do have in place may not be working as it should be. Now, is that a personality behavioral thing, or is that an institutional thing? I'm 22 years old. I'm not qualified enough to say that. I'd have to do research and look back into the history of how we've let it get to this point. But as the face of their party, they have to. The president has two jobs, or the presidential candidates, the nominees, have two jobs basically when it's leading up to the election, and that's to rally up support from core constituents, and then to try to mobilize swing voters. And that's essentially what we see happening with both parties. It may not seem that way because depending on where you receive your media information, or whether or not you actually independently do your own research, the vast majority of Americans aren't doing that, and they consume media en masse. And so when it's the easiest, most convenient thing, and these algorithms are playing on our subconscious, whether we like, dislike, whether it's rage bait or entertainment versus actual fact and policy, it's just the double tap and the swipe that's what's addicting, especially our generation right now.
Okay, a couple of points of clarification. Yes, you're right about two major parties, but in fact, the Democrats and Republicans are the two most viable, really only viable political parties. But really, in fact, the largest group of people don't identify with either party right now. We are not a 50-50 nation. We're 30-40-30 nation, where about 30% identify with each of the major parties, and 40% consider themselves independents. Just one other quick little thing. Yes, we have single-member districts. It's actually not constitutional, but going way, way back, federal law requires single-member districts. But it is possible that could be changed. Anita, I know you've been reading for a while.
I kind of just had a question for y'all. We've talked a bit about how social media and stuff has affected our elections. Have you seen a great change in how your elections run since the introduction of social media?
Yeah, I think not to that extent as you see it here. We have the same phenomenon, and what has changed in our system is when I grew up, was the 80s, we used to have a three-party system, which was sometimes very boring because none of these parties ever had a absolute majority. So two big party, one small party, and the small party choose either one or the other side. So that was the boring system. Now we have 7 parties, which is much more exciting in a way. And we have a 3-party coalition forming government, first time in our history, which makes it complicated. But to your social media point, and at the same time, you see parties popping up, fringes, which is rather new in our system, and their popularity relies heavily on the use of social media. And I think they were the first in the sometimes a little bit old-fashioned German system. To realize the potential of social media. You saw it at the right-wing part. But I think there's one difference, and it's the role of media in Germany as such. I know Americans some of them always freaking out when I explain to them we have a system of not entirely, but in large parts, government-funded media. That does not mean that the government controls the media, but that it means everybody has to pay an amount a month, and in this way everybody finances media which is entirely independent from government or from any other thing. So the and the trust in this media is also declining as it is in the US. But you have some media stations who are really considered neutral, and maybe that's a difference to your system.
I just had a comment on what was said earlier. You know, when we talk about having lots of people who are identified as independent voters, I'm not really sure of a good solution, but I think a big part is that a lot of people in the US that associate with either the Democrat or Republican Party consider these people their votes as throwaway, you know, because a lot of times we'll see a Green Party candidate or a Libertarian Party candidate, but they're never going to be elected as president. And that's a big reason why we see so much intense campaigning, especially in swing states, because they're trying to get these voters who otherwise and you know, you need to have I think it's 50% to win the election, I forgot the amount of electoral votes. I'm an international affairs
270 to win. It's an absolute majority of the electoral college.
Yeah, so, but the only way we're ever gonna see a party that's not a Democrat or Republican win, I think, is at a local level. But even then, you know, our voting turnout is not high in the US, and that's especially the case for local elections. Even, you know, you see the amount of voters decrease from the presidential to the midterm elections, and it's even more so when we're just voting for local offices. But
Well, I think that's where third parties have their best chance, because they are low turnout affairs, and third party supporters tend to be a little bit more dedicated than major party supporters. And so in large elections like presidential and senatorial and et cetera, they'll get drowned out by Democrats and Republicans voting. But in local elections, you have more of a chance. And I will say, about 30 years ago, it almost happened. All right. Ross Perot and the Reform Party, I don't know how viable they would have been in the long run, but they almost broke through. Ross Perot, at times in the 1992 election, was the leading candidate for president. A third-party candidate was in the lead. Okay, now his bizarre behavior pretty much destroyed his own candidacy, but nonetheless, the Reform Party was born, and they managed to elect in a lot of local elections. They managed to elect people to city councils, to mayor, and maybe state legislatures. They even elected a governor at one point. And so, I mean, there were times when we thought in the mid to late 1990s, maybe early 2000s, that we were moving towards a three-party system. But the Reform Party kind of rotted from within, to the point where in the 2000 presidential, their 2000 presidential convention wound up in a brawl where the police had to be called in. And they wound up with two separate candidates, which, you know, it's not divide and conquer, it's divide and fall apart. And so the Reform Party nowadays, it still exists, but it's just one of those many hundreds of little tiny third parties that really aren't going anywhere.
I kind of want to go back to your question about the polarization. I think, honestly, going back to the 2016 election, Trump kind of changed the game in the way he approached politics, because he was never a politician. He kind of stripped back the stability of previous debates and the way you talk about your opponent, and it appealed to people who in the past kind of felt disconnected from politicians. They saw them as people who weren't the everyday man, and they saw this person who tweeted and who openly called their opponent names, and they were just okay, this is somebody who at his core sees himself as a person first and not a politician. And it kind of overall changed how the two parties treated each other, because these insults were being thrown from one party, and people who identified as the other, they if they identify themselves as a Democrat, it's a core part of who they are for the most part, and so they saw it as like a personal insult, so they would like retaliate in kind. And it created this environment that was very hostile, and it was a manner of kind of debate and civility that didn't exist anymore, and it was more, I'm right, you're wrong, and you need to stop talking. And it's kind of trickled down from that original Trump versus Clinton into, I can't talk to my neighbor who has a Trump sign in their front yard, because if I tell them I'm voting for Harris, they're gonna belittle me because I'm an idiot. And he kind of opened a doorway into politics to make it less shiny and less like perfect. And it has therefore created an environment on down that people now feel like it's okay to attack one another instead of have open and civil discourse. Because even going back to, debates between Romney and Obama, like, they fundamentally disagreed on a lot, but they treated each other with civility and with, for the most part, respect. Whereas if you look at a debate between Biden and Trump or Clinton and Trump, it is just insults thrown one after the other, and there's no manner of like civility there.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly about that position. It's really good. You're putting the words. I really agree with you. Not only do we have this polarization, these sort of polar opposites positions, but we also see a rise in extremism. On both sides, it can be discussed on, it can be debated on which side is more extreme, but we have seen a more sort of extreme representation in politics, and social media, of course, has boosted it a lot. But yeah, like that, I remember talking to people and they were like, man, the vice president debate was great because they were so professional with each other. It was a return to form that we have not seen in 8 years. And yeah, Trump did shake a lot of things up, but mind, he did not win the popular vote. It was Clinton, and also the October surprise with Clinton's emails, messed everything up. So yes, we do see this sort of extreme, but also we need to look at how impactful are these extremes sort of are. With right-wing people, we see a lean towards fascism. It's true, and we see that in the Republican government and the Republican parties. So, and of course with less so Democrats, because they're a bit more conservative fiscally, but yeah, these are some really bad issues that we need to sort of face, and I think that's why this election, like I said before, is really important, because there's a possibility that what we see in social media, all this talk about extreme ideology, could lead and become present. And we saw it with the ballot petition, these crazy conservatives with their pro-life arguments, nothing's going to happen, and then that's just happening. So we really need to look at how these politics go from screen into affecting everyday life. Especially in Georgia with the 6 weeks heartbeat bill, people have died because of it. Too many have died because of it. And this is where we need to start asking questions of how far would we let this go on?
You've been waiting for a while, so go ahead.
Thank you. I want to, since we can talk about the differences between the two parties all day. That's what we've been doing for, it feels like, forever. But I'm really interested in at least some sort of cooperation. It seems impossible in our current system, but if there's one thing that I think we need to try to move towards in our political culture, it's cooperation. And I'm wondering, you mentioned that you have your first third-party coalition in government. Obviously ours doesn't, our two parties would never just make a coalition for funsies, but I'm wondering if there were any big political issues that required that, or maybe help that coalition to form, or anything specific that maybe can be pinpointed as to why you think that happened now and not earlier or later.
unfortunately, it's in our system rather a sign of crisis, because historically we had the two big parties, the Progressive Party and the Conservative Party, then the Libertarian Party. As a smaller party, the Green Party plays a huge role in our system. My boss, the foreign minister from the Green Party, for example, what we see in Germany is a decline of the former big parties. So they are all smaller to medium-sized parties. So that made it that was the reason why they chose the three-party coalition. It does not work very well, but I think that maybe the difference is you have always a situation where you're forced to form a compromise, because you will never have a party which can rule on its own. And I give you one example which surprised me here in the last, I don't know, 1-2 years, and you talked about it, it's abortion rights. I had the impression, first of all, that's one thing we also discussed in Germany very emotionally, because it's a very emotional thing, it gets very personal, and we have roughly the same sides, you may say, the rather progressive sides and the rather conservative Christian parts. And when the parties formed a compromise that there is a time where it's legal to perform an abortion up to 12 weeks. After that, it's only under special circumstances legal. It was heavily discussed, but at the end you had a majority in the middle. They gathered in the middle. And what I saw in the US system in the last 2 years was I thought for a while that the Republican Party will form a compromise because we saw some candidates speaking, and with some exceptions, almost everybody of them told them, okay, I'm pro-life, of course, but maybe we can find a compromise and gather around, I don't know, 12 weeks, 15 weeks, 16 weeks, but it didn't happen because it wasn't in their political interest to solve that problem. I think maybe that's the difference, that you gain votes. That's my impression from the outside. You gain votes when you emotionalize people, and when you go on farther on the right or left side. And I think there's a lot of room in the middle. My impression.
So also one thing to remember about the German system, they had a much bigger political shock recently. The basically reunification of Germany from East Germany to West Germany had a significant impact on the party structure and development and things like that. You haven't had that kind of shock in the US system. So there was this massive political change, which changed SPD, CDU, CSU, FDP, because you opened up a significant issue in the country.
Before I leave to class, so my concentration for international versus Europe, and both like have a connection to both like American politics and also European politics, since Germany is part of the European Union. So my thing is like I've been studying a lot about like the rise of the right, basically. Like over the summer I was looking at the French elections and the and like that thing. So would you say, knowing like having that link to both political systems, do you think the extremes, going back to your comments, do you think the extremes are like gaining traction in like in the Western countries, or do you think it's a problem? Like, is it something that as political scientists and like as people who want to go into diplomacy, do you think it's something that we should work on more, like research more and see? You know, does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And my I don't know what you want to say, but the short version would be the answer yes. You see a rise not only in the West European countries, more also in the East European countries, and you see the dividends in Germany with East and West. And when you look at the German party system, for example, because I grew up in the East, it's I think it was sometimes for the West it was too easy. Okay, we have our party system, now we are unified, and you have to be very thankful to accept our party system. And people didn't feel understood, and that's not, of course, the whole answer, but that's part of the answer, that parties and structures are often very traditional, and there are more and more people who aren't on the same side when it comes to these parties and structure, because as a new generation you also have new social needs, you have also political needs that are new, and I think it's sometimes very tough for political parties to keep track with this things. I don't know what you want to add.
Yeah, I mean, the rise of far-right parties is like the main topic that everyone studies nowadays. I think probably your professors can speak to that too in academia and stuff. So I think there's also value to be had for pursuing academic research on the causes of parties. So things like migration, climate change. Finding solutions to those problems is also what we need kind of bright minds to pursue. It's not just per se how can we have a political solution, but also like the actual things on the ground. How can we fix those?
Okay, we're going to wrap this up first by thanking our guests for providing some very valuable insight that I'm sure a lot of you will take away. I do want to remind everybody, as Dominic mentioned, tomorrow at 11 a.m. in room 203 over there, there will be an election forum with several UNG faculty, including myself, where we'll talk about the upcoming presidential election. And for the rest of you, again, we do this every week at 12 o'clock, and you are welcome to come by. Thank you all very much.
Before we head out, please make sure to attend next week's CrossRoad meeting as well as tomorrow's presidential or general election forum. Next week's meeting, I believe, is going to be on prohibition laws, modern and, I guess, past. I don't want to say historic. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting topic of discussion. I'm sure you guys will be full of great ideas as you were today. So I appreciate each and every one of you for coming out, and don't be late to class.
Thank you guys. Thank you. Where are you from?
I'm from Mexico.
Okay.